The neon lights of the cantina flickered in that lazy way they always did on Outpost 7. It was the kind of place where deals got made, fights started, and rumors spread faster than any communication system could carry them. The air smelled like cheap alcohol and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Tommy pushed through the crowded bar, his 19-year-old swagger making him walk like he owned the place. He didn't. He barely owned the shoes on his feet. But tonight Tommy felt different. He felt big. He'd been drinking with some of the other dock workers, and the conversation had turned to the big topics: space, empires, glory. One of the guys had mentioned his uncle working construction on a Valerian ship. Another talked about his father's time in the military before the colony was established. And Tommy, riding that wave of cheap whiskey and youthful confidence, decided this was his moment to say something that would make him legendary among his peers. He spotted them immediately. A table of Valerian soldiers in the corner booth, their scaled skin catching the light like polished armor. They were talking among themselves in their clicking, hissing language. Tommy had no idea what they were saying, but he knew they looked powerful. Intimidating. The kind of beings who'd spent centuries dominating the galaxy. And that's when the idea hit him. Stupid, reckless, but it felt genius at the time. Tommy walked straight toward their table, his heart pounding but his face arranged in a confident smirk. Several of the humans at the bar noticed and went quiet. They could sense what was about to happen, the way animals sense a storm coming. Tommy stopped right beside the Valorians and announced, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that his grandfather had trained the Emperor's personal guard. The elite soldiers. The ones everyone in the galaxy feared. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The music from the jukebox seemed to cut out. The conversations died mid-sentence. Even the bartender stopped pouring. All eyes were suddenly on Tommy. The Valorians at the table didn't move. Their scaled faces remained expressionless, but something had shifted in the air. The temperature seemed to drop. An old Valerian at the far end of the table slowly turned his head toward Tommy. This wasn't just any soldier. This was someone ancient, someone who'd seen things most people couldn't even imagine. His skin was marked with scars and patterns that suggested centuries of experience. His eyes were dark and intelligent, and right now they were locked directly on the teenager who just made the biggest mistake of his young life. The old trainer stood up. He moved slowly, with the kind of deliberate grace that comes from absolute confidence. His movements weren't aggressive, they were controlled, measured, almost ceremonial. He pushed his chair back and straightened his tall frame. Every eye in the cantina followed him as he took a single step toward Tommy. Tommy's confidence evaporated. He suddenly realized what he'd done. The boy tried to step backward, but his feet felt heavy, frozen. The trainer reached Tommy in 3 long strides. His scaled hand came up, and before anyone could process what was happening, he struck. Not with rage or wildness, but with perfect precision. The slap connected across Tommy's face with a sound that echoed through the entire establishment like a gunshot. It was sharp, deliberate, and absolutely humiliating. Tommy staggered backward, his hand flying to his burning cheek. His eyes watered. He could taste blood. Around the cantina, the Valorians began to nod slowly, their clicking sounds forming what sounded like approval. It was the sound of justice being served by their standards. In their culture, disrespect needed to be answered, and the trainer had answered it perfectly. The humans in the bar looked away. Some shook their heads in disappointment. Others looked angry but said nothing. They all understood that this wasn't their fight, not here, not in a place where they were guests in Valerian territory. A few of the dock workers Tommy had been drinking with earlier suddenly became very interested in their drinks. The trainer walked back to his table without saying a single word. He sat down and resumed his conversation like nothing had happened. The jukebox came back to life. Conversations resumed, though they were quieter now, more careful. The moment had passed, but it had left a mark, not just on Tommy's cheek but on something deeper. Tommy stood there trembling. His face burned not just from the physical pain but from the crushing weight of public humiliation. He looked around the room hoping someone would come to his defense, say something, do something. But everyone avoided his eyes. He was alone in that moment, surrounded by people but completely isolated. Without saying anything, Tommy turned and pushed his way back through the crowd toward the exit. His hand stayed pressed against his cheek as he walked out into the cold corridor of the outpost. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing away the noise of the cantina. Out here, in the silence of the station, Tommy finally understood what he'd done. He'd made a claim he couldn't back up, and he'd done it in front of beings who didn't tolerate lies. Now he had to go home and face his grandfather. Tommy's quarters were dark when he got home. The small apartment was the kind of place that came with working at the docks: functional, cramped, and honestly depressing if you spent too much time thinking about it. But right now it was quiet, and that was all that mattered. He needed to think. He needed to figure out what to do next. He found his grandfather, David, sitting in the worn armchair by the window. The old man was staring out at the stars, the way he often did when he thought no one was watching. David was in his 80s now, his face lined with age and his hands spotted with the marks of time. He'd been a mechanic once, then a soldier, then something else, something Tommy had never fully understood. The grandfather had always been vague about his past, changing the subject whenever things got too specific. David turned as Tommy entered, and his weathered face immediately showed concern. He could see the swelling on his grandson's cheek, the redness, the pain written across the boy's expression. "What happened to you?" he asked, already standing up. Tommy felt something crack inside him. He tried to hold it together on the walk home, but seeing his grandfather's worried face broke through all his defenses. The words came pouring out: the cantina, the Valorians, the stupid claim about his grandfather training the Emperor's Guard, the slap that had humiliated him in front of everyone. He told it all, his voice shaking, his eyes getting wet. David listened without interrupting. When Tommy finally finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something Tommy had never seen before. His hands trembled. Actually trembled. David walked over to the small kitchen area and pulled out a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. He poured 2 glasses with shaking hands. One he handed to Tommy. The other he kept for himself. "Sit down, boy," David said quietly. His voice sounded different now. Older, heavier, like he was carrying something he'd been trying to put down for a very long time. Tommy sat. His grandfather remained standing for a moment, staring at the whiskey in his glass like it held answers to questions he'd been asking himself for decades. "I need to tell you something," David finally said. "Something I've never told anyone. Something I wasn't supposed to tell anyone." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Your claim tonight, about me training the Emperor's Guard, you were right. Not exactly right, but close enough." Tommy's eyes went wide. "What?" David sat down heavily in the armchair. "Before all this, before the public contact with the Valorians, before the colonies, before any of this was openly acknowledged, I was part of something. Team. A first contact team." He took a drink. "We knew about the Valorians long before the government admitted it. We were sent to observe, to learn, to prepare humanity for eventually meeting them." Tommy leaned forward, completely focused now. His cheek didn't hurt anymore. "There was a small unit," David continued. "Valorian soldiers. Elite ones, but they were stuck in old ways of fighting. Rigid. Predictable. Someone, I don't even remember who decided it, thought it might be useful to teach them something different. Human combat techniques. Things that came naturally to us but were completely foreign to them." David looked directly at his grandson. "And I was the one who taught them." "But why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Tommy asked. "Because it was classified," David said. "Because I took an oath. Because honestly, boy, I was scared. The Valorians, they didn't like admitting that they learned anything from us. They didn't like acknowledging that humans had something valuable to offer. So the whole thing got buried. Locked away in archives that supposedly don't exist." David leaned forward, and his next words came out as almost a whisper. "The trainer who hit you, he knows. He knows what I did. That's why he hit you so hard. It wasn't just about disrespect. It was about that lie finally coming to the surface after 50 years. "What lie?" Tommy asked. "The lie that the Valorians told their own people," David explained. "They made their elite guard seem perfect, untouchable, pure Valorian strength. But the truth is, some of those soldiers, the best ones, they knew human techniques. They used what we taught them. The Valorians have been hiding that for half a century because it meant admitting that humans made them better. That we contributed something important." Tommy sat back, trying to process everything. "So when I said you trained them, you stumbled onto a secret that powerful beings have been keeping locked away," David finished. "And that trainer, he couldn't stand hearing it spoken aloud in public. He had to shut you up. But the real reason he hit you wasn't anger at a lie. It was anger at the truth finally being said out loud." The old man took another drink and looked out the window at the stars again. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we need to talk about what we're going to do with this." The repair shuttle touched down on Outpost 7 like it had done 100 times before. But this time was different. Captain Lisa Chin sat in the pilot's seat, running through the standard landing procedures with the kind of efficiency that came from years of doing this exact job. To anyone watching, she was just another maintenance specialist arriving to fix whatever was broken on the station. Her credentials were perfect. Her paperwork was flawless. Her cover was absolutely airtight. What nobody knew was that Lisa hadn't come here to fix a cargo vessel's failing engines, though she'd do that too. She'd come because someone in high command had finally noticed something that had been invisible for 50 years. And they'd sent her to find out if it was real. Lisa stepped out of her shuttle into the artificial sunlight of the docking bay. The station smelled like every other outpost: recycled air, machine oil, and the faint chemical tang of station maintenance. She went through all the motions. She checked in with station operations. She got her assignment for the cargo ship repairs. She found her temporary quarters. She grabbed a meal. Everything normal. Everything routine. But the entire time her mind was working. She'd been given a name. David. An old man who'd lived on the station for years. A grandfather. And she'd been given very specific instructions. Find out if the rumors were true. Find out if humanity had actually contributed to Valerian military strength. And if so, figure out why it had been buried so deep that almost nobody remembered it existed. That evening, Lisa made her way to the cantina. She ordered a drink and found a spot at the bar where she could observe without being too obvious about it. And there he was, a kid with a swollen cheek, nursing what looked like his first real drink. The boy looked miserable. Angry. Embarrassed. Lisa recognized the signs immediately. This was someone who'd had something happen to him recently. Something public. Something that had left a mark. She made her move casually. She ordered another drink and moved down the bar, getting closer to the kid. She let a moment pass, then she started a conversation the way people do. About the station, about the work, about how boring it was being stuck on an outpost. The kid, whose name she learned was Tommy, started out guarded. But Lisa had a gift for getting people to talk. She asked the right questions in the right way. She seemed genuinely interested. She didn't push too hard. Then she mentioned the incident. Casually, like she'd just heard about it from someone at the dock. She said she'd seen the Valerian trainer around and wondered what that was all about. Tommy's face tightened, but something in him needed to talk about it. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was just that he was still processing what had happened. Whatever the reason, Tommy started telling her everything. Lisa listened carefully. She asked questions that seemed innocent but weren't. She wanted to know about his grandfather. What was the old man's name? How long had he been on the station? What had he done before he retired? Did Tommy know anything about military work? About first contact? About classified operations? She wove it all into natural conversation, making it sound like she was just making small talk with a hurt kid. By the time Tommy finished his story, Lisa had what she needed. She excused herself, said something about getting an early night before starting the repairs tomorrow. Tommy probably didn't even notice how carefully she'd guided that entire conversation. Lisa made her way through the station corridors to the secure communications hub. She used her credentials, the ones that showed she was Captain Lisa Chin, maintenance specialist. The real credentials she carried, the ones that identified her as military intelligence, she kept hidden. She found a private booth and initiated a secure connection back to command. The transmission took a few minutes to establish. Out here on the station, communications were always a bit delayed. Finally, her commanding officer's face appeared on the screen. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Did you find him?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir," Lisa replied. "David Palmer. 84 years old. Former military. He's been living quietly on this station for the last 15 years. And based on what I just learned from his grandson, the intelligence is confirmed. Palmer was part of the original first contact team. And more importantly, he trained Valerian soldiers." The officer's jaw tightened. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without direct confirmation," Lisa said. The kid didn't know the details, but he knew enough. Palmer taught combat techniques to Valerian elite units. That's why the trainer reacted so violently when the boy mentioned it. Because it's true, and the Valorians have been hiding it. "This is bigger than we thought," the officer said quietly. "If this gets out, if the Valorians admit that human military training contributed to their elite force, it changes the entire power dynamic in this sector." Lisa nodded. "What do you want me to do?" The officer was silent for a long moment. "Get close to Palmer. Find out exactly what he taught them. Find out how much the Valorians know about the knowledge transfer. And most importantly, find out if he's willing to talk about it." "Understood, sir," Lisa said. She ended the transmission and sat back in the booth, thinking about the quiet old man she was about to turn upside down. David was fixing a water valve in his apartment when the knock came. He'd been avoiding going outside, avoiding running into anyone from the cantina, avoiding the whispers he knew were spreading about his grandson's stupidity. He opened the door and found Lisa standing there, but the woman who stood in his doorway was completely different from the casual mechanic he'd seen around the station. "Can we talk?" she asked. It wasn't really a question. David knew immediately what this was. He'd been waiting for this conversation for 50 years. He stepped aside and let her in. Lisa didn't bother with small talk. She pulled out a data pad and showed him files, actual classified files that shouldn't exist outside of secure government archives. David's hands went cold as he looked at them. Training manuals with his handwriting. Mission reports with his name. Photographs from decades ago showing him working with Valerian soldiers. It was all there. Everything he'd kept secret. "How did you get these?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "High Command cleared them," Lisa said. "Not publicly, but cleared enough for me to access them. They've known about this the whole time, David. They've been watching. And they've been waiting for the right moment to use this information." David sat down slowly. His legs didn't feel strong enough to hold him up anymore. "Use it for what?" Lisa pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "The Valorians have been lying to their own people for 50 years. They've made their elite guard seem like they were born perfect, trained in pure Valerian tradition, untouchable and superior. But the truth is different. Some of their best soldiers learned from you. They learned human techniques. They learned things that made them better fighters. And the Valorians have been hiding that because it means admitting that humans contributed something valuable." David rubbed his face. "I took an oath. I was bound by secrecy." "I know," Lisa said. "And you kept that oath. But times change, David. Situations change. And right now humanity is being treated like second-class people throughout this sector. We're being looked down on. We're being marginalized. And part of the reason is because the Valorians have spent 50 years convincing everyone, including themselves, that we're inferior." David looked up at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your grandson was humiliated yesterday," Lisa said. "He made a stupid claim, sure. But he was humiliated for speaking a truth that the Valorians didn't want spoken out loud. That trainer didn't hit him just because the kid was disrespectful. That trainer hit him because that boy had accidentally poked at something that's been festering for decades." Lisa leaned forward. "We can either let the Valorians keep hiding this. We can let them keep pretending that they've never needed anything from us. We can let humans continue being treated as newcomers and inferiors. Or we can show the galaxy what actually happened. We can prove that human military knowledge was valuable enough that the Valerian Empire itself used it to build their elite forces." David stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the stars the same way he'd done thousands of times over the years. "If I do this, if I confirm all of this, there will be consequences. Not just for me. For Tommy. For everyone." Yes, Lisa agreed. She didn't lie about it. "But there are also consequences for staying silent. Your grandson learned that yesterday. He learned that silence doesn't protect you. It just leaves you powerless." David turned back to face her. "What do you need from me?" "The truth," Lisa said. "Publicly. On record. Testimony about what you taught them, how you taught them, and why it mattered. We have the documents, but we need the witness. We need someone who was actually there." David thought about Tommy. He thought about his grandson's face when that slap landed. He thought about the shame in the boy's eyes. He thought about a future where humans on this outpost, on every outpost, were treated like they didn't matter. Like they couldn't contribute anything important. Like they were just temporary visitors in someone else's galaxy. "If I do this," David said slowly, "what happens to the Valorians?" "They have to admit the truth," Lisa said. "The Emperor will have to acknowledge that human military training contributed to their elite force. It will be difficult for them. It will damage their pride. But it will also change how they see us. It will change how the entire galaxy sees us." David thought about the trainer's face. About the controlled precision of that slap. About a culture so concerned with maintaining an image of perfection that they'd buried the truth for half a century. "Okay," David said finally. "Let's do it. Let's show them." Lisa nodded. She didn't smile. This wasn't about victory or vindication. It was about justice. It was about making sure that humanity's contributions were recognized, even if it meant forcing a powerful empire to face uncomfortable truths about itself. "We'll need to move carefully," Lisa said. "We can't just announce this. We need to present it to both human and Valerian leadership simultaneously. We need to control how this information gets released." "When?" David asked. "Soon," Lisa said. "Before the moment passes. Before people forget about what happened to your grandson. We use that incident as the catalyst. We use it to crack open a door that's been sealed shut for 50 years. David nodded. He looked at the classified files on the data pad, at his own handwriting staring back at him from decades past. It was time to stop hiding. The council chambers were unlike anything Tommy had ever seen before. The room was massive, designed to accommodate representatives from multiple species. On one side sat the human delegation, diplomats, military advisors, and government officials who'd been briefed on what was about to happen. On the other side sat the Valorians, their scaled forms arranged in formal rows. And in the center, elevated above everyone else, sat the Emperor himself. Tommy stood in the observation gallery with Lisa. They were hidden behind reinforced glass, able to see everything but unable to be seen. His grandfather stood on the floor of the chamber, looking small against the vast space. But David's back was straight. His chin was up. He looked like a soldier. The human ambassador began to speak. She presented the files, one by one. She showed the training records. She showed the mission reports. She showed the photographs from 50 years ago. She explained, in careful, measured language, that humanity had contributed to the development of Valerian military techniques. That human soldiers, working alongside Valerian warriors, had shared knowledge that had made the Valerian elite guard stronger. The Valerian delegation sat in absolute silence. The ambassador continued. She talked about innovation. About how different species brought different perspectives. About how the galaxy was stronger when civilizations worked together and learned from each other. She spoke about respect. Real respect, not the kind that came from pretending to be perfect but the kind that came from acknowledging the contributions of others. When she finished, there was a moment of complete stillness. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The tension in the room was so thick that Tommy could feel it even from behind the glass. Then the ancient trainer stood up. This was the same being who'd slapped Tommy in the cantina. The same warrior who'd known the truth for 50 years. The entire chamber waited to hear what he would say. He was old even by Valerian standards, and his voice when he spoke carried the weight of centuries. What the human ambassador says is true, he said simply. His words were translated immediately into human languages. 50 years ago, I accepted training from this man. He gestured toward David. I was resistant at first. My pride was strong. I believed that Valerian ways were complete, that we needed nothing from other species. But I was wrong. The trainer paused. Tommy could see the effort it took for him to speak these words. The human techniques were different from ours, the trainer continued. They were creative. They were adaptable. They showed me that strength comes not just from discipline but from flexibility, from thinking differently. I took what this man taught me and I applied it. And yes, it made me a better warrior. It made our elite guard better. And we have been hiding this truth because we were ashamed. A ripple of sound moved through the Valerian delegation. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Recognition maybe. Or relief that a lie was finally being put to rest. The Emperor stood. The entire chamber immediately fell silent. When an Emperor stands, everyone listens. Humans have been part of the Valerian sphere for many years now, the Emperor said. His voice was deep and carried an authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate. And during those years we have treated them as new arrivals. As visitors. As those who had much to learn from us. But we have not been honest about our own history. We have not acknowledged what we learned from them. The Emperor looked directly at David. I am issuing an official statement. Humanity has contributed to the strength of the Valerian Empire. This contribution is now recognized and recorded in the Imperial Archives. From this moment forward, humans will be treated not as newcomers, but as partners in the development of galactic civilization. The statement hung in the air like it was written in light. Cheers erupted from the human delegation. Some people were crying. Some were standing and applauding. Tommy felt Lisa's hand squeeze his shoulder. Down on the chamber floor, David looked up at the observation gallery. His eyes found Tommy's. The old man nodded slowly. A gesture that said everything that needed to be said. Over the next several hours, the political machinery of two worlds shifted. Agreements were made. Policies were changed. Humans were suddenly being offered positions on Valerian committees. Trade agreements were renegotiated. The entire power dynamic in the sector began to recalibrate itself. Lisa watched it all happen with the satisfaction of someone who'd completed a mission. She approached David as he was leaving the chamber. It's done, she said simply. The truth is out there now. You can't put it back in the box. What happens to you now? David asked. I go back to command, Lisa said. I file my report. I move on to the next assignment. But this, she gestured at the shifting crowds around them, at the humans and Valorians now talking to each other as equals, this will ripple outward. Other stations will hear about it. Other sectors will know. The whole balance of how humans are treated in this part of the galaxy is changing. That night, Tommy sat in the same cantina where everything had started. His cheek had mostly healed, though there was still a faint mark. He ordered a drink and waited. The ancient trainer walked in an hour later. He saw Tommy and approached. Without saying anything, he placed a small token on the bar in front of the boy. It was a military decoration, something from the Valerian Armed Forces. "Your grandfather made me a better warrior," the trainer said. "That decoration is from 50 years ago, earned with the techniques he taught me. I think it belongs with his family now." Then the trainer left. Tommy picked up the decoration and held it up to the light. In the cantina mirror he could see his reflection. His chin was higher than it had ever been. He was no longer the kid who'd been humiliated. He was the grandson of a man who'd changed the galaxy. He was human, and that meant something now.